To a very special broadcast of Primal Screen in partnership with Melbourne Knowledge Week. This is Primal Screen, an evolving film industry. This is Primal Screen's first ever live in conversation event, and it's also a 10-year anniversary of film criticism on Monday nights here in the RRR studios, which started way back with the OG Plato's Cave crew, Thomas Caldwell, Tara Judah and Josh Nelson. It's also the final few days of April Amnesty. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe or donate and help keep RRR on the airwaves. We are all volunteers here on Primal Screen, and it's your support that allows us to deliver this show every week. And if you subscribe in the next few days, there's a whole heap of prizes that you can win just by supporting us during April Amnesty. So for tonight's live in conversation event, sorry, I should introduce ourselves. My name is Flick Ford.
That's what I was wondering. I was wondering whether we had the introduction.
We should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Flick Ford, and joining me in the studio is my co-host, Paul Anthony Nelson. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Flick. Hello, sports fans. I feel like
we do look like, we're going to be talking sports tonight and film. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. But for tonight's live in conversation event, we're going to be shining a spotlight on the strength and diversity of Melbourne's film community. We're going to be reflecting on how our local film industry has fared in the global pandemic, the ongoing impact of lockdown, travel restrictions, and the evolving audience experience and the changing modes of film consumption in our new COVID normal reality. And to help us with this extraordinary task, we have a superstar lineup of film industry heavyweights. We're going to be joined by the Director of Film at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, Kristy Matheson. We'll also speak with Anthony Grundy, who is the Distribution Manager at Screen Australia. And we'll chat with film critic, film programmer and General Manager at ASTA, Zak Hepburn. And tonight's event is being broadcast live from the RRR studios. So if you're in Melbourne, you can listen in on 102.7 FM. Or 3RRR digital for those interstate or overseas. We're also being filmed, so if you'd like to see our beautiful faces, head to rrr.org.au or watch on RRR's YouTube and Facebook pages or on the Melbourne Knowledge Week Digital Hub. So in 2008, the federal government established Screen Australia to support and promote the development of a highly creative, innovative and commercially sustainable Australian screen production industry. Now today, Screen Australia offers support in the development, production, promotion and distribution of Australian programs. The last year has of course had a very big impact on our local screen industry. And to help us unpack this further is Distribution Manager of Screen Australia, Anthony Grundy. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's our pleasure. It's I suppose it's a bit hard to come to terms with what this year has been like for all of us. And I don't know if this is too heavy a question to start with, but what has been the creative impact of the lockdown and this pandemic, do you think?
Look, it's interesting. There was definitely some shows that very quickly included some themes around isolation and the feeling of just having our daily lives turned upside down. A lot of film, a lot of online and TV, because I guess their production, when timelines are shorter, were very quick to put some of those themes into the production. Feature films, maybe it'll take a little bit longer for those to start filtering through, but no doubt they will, because I think features really reflect back to us something about our lives, and feature film has that incredible ability to say something about what's going on, and no doubt we'll see that down the track.
Yeah, for sure. That is one of the things I was really interested to discuss with you, is like what kind of pitches you're getting on this, whether we are going to have themes around isolation or general anxiety and medical horror. It's kind of interesting just from that perspective of how something like this can really shape what kind of films get created and kind of what stories we're going to be drawn to as an audience as well. So you've already seen that coming through?
More in the TV and online space, but I think in the feature space, there's such a we've so much different types of things come in thematically, but I think that I think someone said to me recently that after 9/11 there was definitely a way of processing kind of that significant event on the world, and then that started to obviously filter through in the films that are developed and ultimately screened, and no doubt that this will have the same thing. There's nothing off the top of my head, it's probably worth me saying that my role at Screen Australia is more in the distribution space, so I tend to work with things that are more finished anyway, and it obviously takes years for films to be developed and produced. So I'm not too sure what is happening in the development space, because we provide development funding for feature films as well. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. Yeah,
it's interesting because during the lockdown, as film critics, we were saying like the kind of films we want to watch is very much being impacted by the fact that we're going through a global pandemic. So yeah, I think on both sides there's a lot of interest in this area, and who knows, we might be sick of talking about disease and
just no more Zoom movies, Like
also, I suppose, was Screen Australia during this time, were you still able to provide that funding support during the lockdown? Was there kind of a financial impact for Screen Australia?
There was. The Screen Australia, we didn't shut down at all. We started remotely, I guess, as everyone did. And but it was obviously the lockdown when it happened back in March meant most shows had to just completely stop what they were doing. And there's an expense that's associated with that kind of shutdown, particularly for the really big films. And so our role at that stage was, I guess, recognising where support was needed, financial support in particular, to just make sure shows were kind of taken offline quickly and effectively. And then there was a period where we did a couple of things. One component was that we launched like a COVID support fund, where I think we've spent about $9.7 million for COVID-related expenses across about 100 projects across the sector, to make sure that the productions can return when obviously everything started ramping up again. And yeah, so obviously there's a financial implication to shutting down, but also from a safety, obviously a set is a place of work for many people, and making sure that there was that comfort coming back. The other thing we did was we were part of the Australian Screen Sector Task Force, who created a series of COVID safe guidelines for producers to use to know how they can come back safely. And more recently, this is something that directly I'm working on. The federal government announced a $20 million kind of rescue funding for independent cinemas. So kind of there's many sectors of the industry where the COVID has had a really kind of negative impact, and independent cinemas have really felt the pain of the shutdowns for a number of reasons. So it's great to be part of an initiative where we're able to keep cinema alive, particularly in regional and remote locations, because cinema plays such an important role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it really can be defined in financial terms, because as soon as, there was a lot of smaller and independent filmmakers and cinemas were obviously really badly affected by the pandemic and having to lock down. And we've spoken to, we've had many interviews over the last year about that. And I think that that's really interesting as well. The way it's so obvious, but to preserve our film industry, we really do need to have that financial support. So that's really encouraging to hear that that's there. I'm kind of interested as well whether we'll see, do you think that we'll see a shift in the way in which these films are being made and distributing, like how we're deciding to distribute? Because I wondered whether with all the issues where, whether we'll shift away from traditional distribution and exhibition practices. Do you think that will happen in the following months?
I do, and I think that it's not directly related to COVID. I think there are some kind of structural challenges that the theatrical, landscape faces and have been facing for many years, and that's partly wrapped up in the decline of DVD or traditional TV. So the business model around feature film distribution has been changing or eroding, if you like, and I think what happened when COVID came along, it kind of accelerated some of these structural issues that we're facing. And like you're seeing it, particularly with what's happening in the US, with a lot of the studios starting their own streaming services, this COVID moment, which turned the tap off from a cinema's point of view for this big American product. And I think cinemas realized that they were really reliant on big Hollywood blockbusters to drive major dollars through the door and keep people coming into the cinema. So when that all was, a lot of the studios moved their big tentpole releases out of 2020, it put a great pressure on cinemas. But at the same time, there's a thing called the theatrical window, which in Australia it's 90 days, and that means cinemas have the opportunity to screen a film, and it can't come onto the home entertainment platform for 90 days. And this window has been very rigid for a long time. Cinemas really fight for it because it's a way of maintaining that exclusivity around going to the movies and, leaving the house and paying $20. So they fight for the windows, but then this COVID has created an opportunity where studios are now negotiating shorter windows and moving really big, high-profile tentpole releases straight onto their streaming services. You might have seen Disney did that with Mulan. And they're also creating new kind of steps in the value chain that are good for them, but they just work a little bit differently to the way traditional distribution worked. So, sorry, that was the long answer, but the short answer is I think that we will continue to see the evolution of the way people consume content. And but having said that, I still think that cinema is such a unique experience. And the thing that people say a lot is you can cook at home, but people still like to eat in restaurants. And I think the same is true for cinema, where the experience of being in a dark room with a big screen, you really can't create that at home. And the occasion of going to the movies is the thing that what makes it special. And I think from our point of view, there's something, the value of, from a cultural point of view, of coming together and watching a film like High Ground or even The Dry and Penguin Bloom. It's very special, and you need that in cinema experience to make it unique and a special occasion. So I think cinema's still going to be fine. The studio and the window models are up for debate. Who knows where we're going to go? I know you've got some guests on later that can probably talk more specifically to the changes in the exhibition landscape. But I think a lot of it is audience led. The audiences they've had an opportunity to sit on their couch for a year and really do a deep dive into Netflix. And while that's great and that's an important component of the ecosystem, I still think cinema's the bomb.
Yes, cinema is the bomb. Anthony Grundy, Screen Australia. I was wondering with that, because a lot of that stuff with the windows shrinking and in some cases being abolished is often happening from a global perspective, being led by America with the Disney Plus stuff, as you mentioned, and with HBO Max and Warner Brothers, of course. But I'm wondering, have local streamers been as on board with this sort of thing? Like, is there sort of stuff in the works with like Screen Australia and Stan to kind of work on that sort of basis, or with Australian product or anything on that basis?
Yeah, there is. I mean, Stan has just gone from strength to strength. They're really quite, given they're a slightly different beast to the big global streamers like Amazon or Netflix or Disney. They carry a huge amount of Australian content. They're obviously really passionate about that being one of their points of difference, which I think is fascinating. And they've continued to grow their membership base. And I don't know if you've noticed, I'm sure in Melbourne it's the same as it is in Sydney. There's often when Stan gets behind one of its Australian releases, there's bus sides and there's like the promotion around some of the awareness driving marketing activities are sensational. So I hope that is going to continue. And it's interesting. There's the government has put out a green paper quite recently just to open the conversation around the requirements of the streamers to put some of the money that they take from the local or from local audiences back into the local screen sector. And it's kind of halfway through its process of being debated, but it'll be interesting to see where that lands. And if you look to many countries in the world, they've taken a similar approach where there's a requirement of the streamers to put money back into the local production sector. So we'll see, maybe that will happen here too.
Yeah, some more Australian Netflix original movies would be great. It's just kind of wondering whether that would sort of have a flow on to the local release patterns in terms of, because I guess audiences have sort of migrated more to at home now.
I also think that, like, as you were saying before, Anthony, about like the return to cinema, of course we all love cinema here, and going to the theatre has, we've all missed it. We've been in now, I've got a very fancy home projector set up, but it still does not in any way compare to being actual cinema theatre. And I think that, like, it's lovely it's kind of reshaped, I think, how we kind of what we decide to go see. And it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to look over the next few months.
From a distribution perspective, like, what have you noticed so far about what is drawing people into cinemas post-lockdown, or post, in this COVID normal world? Like, obviously there's been big hits like The Dry and Penguin Bloom, and I mean the Dry's success has been off the chart, like freakish. But in terms of are you noticing anything that's sort of leading people back to in particular that's drawing people back to the cinema?
It's a great question. I think that so what happened when a lot of the American studio films moved out and cinemas started to reopen, and I think it's worth saying, which is, it may be evident, but Australia is one of the first territories in the world to be back to 100% capacity. So there's no, except in Perth where there may be some, they're experiencing another little shutdown. But but cinemas have really, like, we are very lucky to live in a country where our, the COVID is currently having less impact. But when cinemas started to reopen last year, all of the American big blockbusters moved out. There was a real opportunity for independent films, not only Australian films, but just non-studio films to come in. And there were hundreds of them. Like, every Monday, I kind of look at the box office numbers. And for example, this weekend, there's 175 films that were screening in cinemas nationally. So there's always been a lot of product around. But then within that, you kind of say, well, some of it's foreign language, or it might be a bit less shiny blockbuster. But in the last couple of weeks, we've seen like Peter Rabbit 2, which is an Australian film, Mortal Kombat, which was shot here. Actually, the top three films in this last weekend were Mortal Kombat, Kong versus Godzilla, and Peter Rabbit 2, and they're all Australian shot films, or Australian made films. So we do box above our weight on that front as well. But I think now that we're seeing these big American blockbusters come back, that will give the other studios more confidence to move, stuff that may have been pushed a lot further out up until, possibly the next couple of months in Australia. So it's kind of, I think that for the mainstream cinema goers, they do love that big American kind of shiny blockbusters. And you mentioned The Dry earlier. We did an initiative just in January called Our Summer of Cinema, and The Dry was a centerpiece of that campaign. And I guess the problem with last year was because no one was going to the cinemas, Flick, as you mentioned, it's only when you're in the cinema that you see trailers or you see posters, and the behavior of falling out of cinema going was part of the problem. So we kind of worked with the distributors to launch a campaign just to help remind Australians that there's some really fantastic Australian content coming through in that summer period. And it was, hugely successful. It clearly demonstrated that Australian audiences have an appetite for great Aussie films.
Oh, absolutely. If you've just tuned in, this is a special broadcast of Primal Screen in collaboration with Melbourne Knowledge Week. We've been speaking to Anthony Grundy, the distribution manager of Screen Australia, about the impact that the global pandemic has had on our local film industry. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to Primal Screen, an evolving film industry on RRR and Melbourne Knowledge Week's digital hub. Stay tuned.
RRR presents Melbourne Knowledge Week.
You're listening and perhaps also watching Primal Screen's first ever live in conversation event in partnership with Melbourne Knowledge Week. This is Primal Screen, an evolving film industry, with Paul Anthony Nelson and myself, Flick Ford. You can listen in via 102.7 FM or watch us at rrr.org.au or on RRR's YouTube and Facebook pages or on the Melbourne Knowledge Week digital hub. And just prior to those sponsorship announcements, we spoke with the distribution manager of Screen Australia, Anthony Grundy, about the impact the global pandemic has had on funding and distribution of Australian content. So on tonight's show, we're exploring the challenges that our local film industry has experienced with lockdowns and cinema restrictions and what we can expect in our new COVID normal reality. One of the key organisations in our film community is ACMI, the Australian Centre of the Moving Image. Starting out as the State Film Centre of Victoria, ACMI is Australia's national museum of film, TV, video games, digital culture and art. And earlier this year, ACMI re-emerged from the wreckage of 2020 with a redesigned layout of their multi-platform museum, complete with a curated wall of objects, structural installations and a living staircase. And joining us now is the Director of Film at ACMI, Kristy Matheson. Hello, Kristy.
Hi, lovely to be here.
It's so nice to have you on. So, Paul, I know you went to the reopening of ACMI. So Paul's perhaps better placed for it. But can you talk us through, Kristy, how did that go what was the process like on deciding what changes to make at ACMI, what to remove, what to include? Just, talk us through it.
It's been a really long process in the making, and obviously many colleagues have driven the new exhibition. But logistically, our exhibition had really come to the end of its life. Screenworlds had been with us for 10 years, and so it was really time for a revamp. And so when we went into the process of thinking about how we would tell our story of the moving image, Curatorially, ACMI made a very specific choice to prioritise First Peoples stories as central to that exhibition, and really looking at how we could unearth probably not sort of insignificant but lesser known stories, within the story of the moving image. So for us, it was important we engaged a First Peoples advisory group that really led us through that curatorial process. Our First Nations curators were embedded on that project. So there's a really important story that sits at the heart of the new exhibition. And of course, we understood that we would never be able to fit the entire history of the moving image into one building, into this centrepiece exhibition. So we've really looked at how we develop this in conjunction with all of the other offers that sit across the museum, but really looking at what does it mean to be a multi-platform museum. So we have a wonderful object that people can pick up for free when they come into the exhibition called The Lens, and it looks like a lovely little Viewmaster. And so with that, you can go around and collect items in the exhibition that you see. And then it's something that takes you into an online portal so that you have a chance to explore and engage and fall down many, many rabbit holes when you get home. So for us, it's not just about the visit you have to the exhibition and to our physical space. It's about really thinking about the museum as being something in its physical form and something in its digital form, and how can we sort of expand people's curiosity across all of those zones.
That's so beautiful, and that's a lovely way to kind of characterize cinema. I mean, cinema is, of course, incredibly tactile, and a lot of film nerds are obsessed with like all the different textures that are involved. If you think about old film stock and things like that, that sounds wonderful. I actually was not at the opening launch, but Paul, I remember seeing your post about it, and it's kind of fascinating. You've had very positive responses to the reopening, so congratulations.
It's beautiful. It's so much fun. And yeah, I 100%, as somebody that both visited and worked in Screen Worlds, I could say that very much hit the end of its life. And this is a revelation, this new one. It is, the story of the moving image is quite incredible.
Yeah, and I think for us, it's really about looking at all of the many facets of the moving image, but also having experiences that are very interactive and tactile, having moments of learning. But it's really, for us, it's about how do we start you in one place and hope that it sparks a curiosity, give you enough information to really make you a curious consumer. And what does that mean? And how can we sort of look at this one moment to keep expanding on, fandom or on, obsessions that we all have in this space? So I think for us, that's the thing that we always circle back to. It's how can we get you excited about something else, and then you will go off and make more choices.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think about how sometimes film spectatorship is seen as this very passive thing, which we all know it is not. So it's lovely to think that when you enter those worlds, you get to kind of engage more or become this active participant. I was kind of interested, and you've already sort of touched upon this a little bit, but how do you think that the idea of the moving image, how do you think that that's changed since ACMI's inception?
Well, I mean, I think that if you had have said to someone, a decade ago that we would all be walking around with essentially a studio in our pocket, you would never have believed that. The idea that we now have the ability to not only consume, but we have the ability to create and to broadcast, from our own telephones. It's kind of, it really is something that would have seemed like science fiction if someone had have said this to you in the year 2000. And so it's got all this, those incredible developments. It also puts a huge responsibility on all of us as consumers to really think about what does that mean and what responsibility comes with that. But for a museum such as ACMI, it's really to think about digital literacy in a very sort of meaningful way, and how do we help consumers unpack the moving image. And that's everything from diving into fandom to recognizing, voices that haven't been heard before. But it's also about this crucial role that the moving image is playing in democracy, in real time in our lives. So I think that's a huge change, and it's a, it's a brand new challenge for everyone. And so I think the other thing that's really changed is we've got this new dialogue that's very exciting and is, for me, I think, very optimistic about who gets to tell their stories and how we tell our stories. And the extension of that is who gets to be an audience, who gets to be a consumer. So these are kind of big sort of fundamental philosophical shifts that I think have happened not recently. They've been bubbling for some time, but it does feel like it's an exciting time to be thinking about the moving image at the moment.
I think with this democratization of the moving image in particular, the thing that makes me most optimistic is everybody should get to tell their story.
Yeah,
exactly. But then we also we do need to have that conversation about how do we consume and how do we know how do we know what those messages are? And not that there are right messages and wrong messages or good stories or bad stories, but it's more about how do we all become, I guess, very analytical consumers as well.
I love also that when you're thinking about the curation of the screening programs and the exhibition, you're thinking about the consumer, but it's also like what they then go on to make, which I think is really lovely because, when we don't see ourselves represented on screen, there is an impact of that. And if that continually happens, we do silence voices and we silence histories. So I think that's it's lovely that ACMI is kind of aligning itself with that responsibility that I think cinema does have to talk to a truth and truths, perhaps, like multiplicity of that.
Yeah, and that extends into video games and all sorts of, the whole gamut of the medium, really.
Yeah. I do love the fact that ACMI has all these different bits. As a bit of a gamer fan myself, I love the fact that there's this real, multitude of what we see as screen culture more broadly.
Yeah, we're kind of myopic here on Primal Screen. We're very cinematic to a fault, but ACMI is a broad church.
I'm not going to lie. When it comes to video games, my only use at ACMI is to be the person that can test if an idiot could play the game. Like, I'm really that is the only thing I can bring to the video game conversation, sadly, but true.
Just like myself.
Well, I suppose my interest in video games is actually the way in which they're increasingly lending on cinematic form and coming into and changing also how we then, they're in conversation at the moment, which I find so exciting. And I just suppose I love the way that technology has changed to allow for that, which that's just something
but also I think and also if we think about the games industry, really, I mean, music and film and television don't hold a slight torch to the engine that is the games industry. And also the idea that we still in some quarters may think of games as something that it's just for teenagers, or it's not about narrative. These huge narrative structures and how we think about world building and stories, and it's not inconceivable that there's things that other elements of the moving image can and are learning from the games industry as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, I suppose, those access points, I think like you were saying, someone might come to ACMI and maybe be more interested in the gaming and then get drawn over to the dark world of cinema.
Well, there's a lovely moment in the new exhibition where my exhibition colleagues built a Foley room so that people could learn how Foley is made and how, so it's kind of, and it sits quite adjacent, quite close to the video game section of the exhibition, where you can sit there and play new and, really wonderful independent games. So it's kind of this lovely idea that you might drift from a Foley room and then find yourself, in front of the Mad Max car, and then you might find yourself off playing a video game. So it's quite nice to have all these worlds swimming very close together.
Yeah.
Find yourself being frustrated in your 40s, just like you were in your teens, and not being able to get Dragon's Lair to work.
Personal experience.
Fruit Ninja is about the scope of my skill level, I'm afraid.
It's kind of interesting with the reemergence of ACMI and this new space that you have, or how you've redesigned the space. It's kind of interesting because we've all kind of come out of lockdown looking, well, maybe speaking for myself, but feeling like very scrappy. I've spent a year in track pants. And so it's a bit odd that ACMI has just kind of come out and with such a strong opening to what has been a horrible year. Can you talk a little bit about what the impact of the pandemic has actually had on ACMI?
Well, look, I mean, I can't state enough how incredibly lucky, myself and my colleagues have been in this time. When the pandemic hit, our museum was already closed, and thanks to the Victorian government, we were closed for this redevelopment. So we had 2 years to plan our museum closing. We had 2 years to work out how to shut down, and everyone else in our industry had the trauma of having to do that almost overnight. So we could not have been more fortunate. And so for us, it really meant that we all knew how lucky we were. We all knew that we were so close to being finished, the museum as well. So it sort of was this amazing drive for us to just know that we had a good idea, we had it all in place, but I think it really pushed us all to really try and just knock it out of the park. We all worked incredibly hard for that whole time that we were closed. And then we did think really about, this idea of, we'd always been a museum that played in the physical and the digital space, but it really pushed us to kind of really dive into what does it mean to be a multi-platform museum? What is that genuine digital offer? How is it more than just, oh, here's a list of things you could watch? So I think we did a lot of deep thinking about that. We launched Cinema 3, which is our online film platform, which is an extension of our cinemas. We worked with our colleagues at Melbourne Cinematheque to do a virtual Cinematheque. We provided, lots of online learning. But it was kind of great too to see, how incredibly well our colleagues at MIF did an online festival. So we played in that digital space. We thought a lot about the digital space, but, for us, it was really about how could this moment sort of galvanize us as a community, an ACMI family. And really it just made us want to make that opening kind of just spectacular for everyone and a big celebration.
Yeah, I know that I'm part of Melbourne Cinematheque, and I think having the virtual Cinematheque during lockdown was wonderful. And also, MIF being online.
I was stunned at how seamless that was.
It was just wonderful. And I feel like, I know we all had to do it from our houses, but it was kind of, winter is not winter in Melbourne without MIF. And so it was so nice to feel like, oh, okay, it's not the same, but we can still have this. And it was really special and kind of, I don't know, things like that I feel did make people feel, just a bit jollied along when it was getting very dark.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that was second lockdown by that point, wasn't it? That was good.
Yeah. We were really in the thick of it by then, yeah.
And, I've never been to a MIF opening night before where my partner and I ordered a massive cheese platter to have.
I did once go to a MIF screening where the person sitting next to me proceeded to pull out a whole cheese board and assemble it on this, and I was like, this is incredible. So maybe you need to just team up with that person at MIF this year and be like, I've got a taste for cheese boards now. We're not going back.
I was actually delighted because I usually am lining up outside some theatre in the rain, and I was loving the fact that I was in a matching tracksuit. I bought it especially for MIF. Watching films. It's great. Don't know what that says about me. Look, if you've just tuned in, this is Primal Screen, an evolving film industry, our very first live in conversation and one of the first events for Melbourne Knowledge Week, which started today. We've been speaking with Kristy Matheson, the Director of Film at ACMI, to find out more about some of the current exhibitions and resources and film screenings at ACMI. You can head to acmi.net.au. This is Primal Screen on RRR.
Darabinot speak.
welcome back. You're listening to Primal Screen and Evolving Film Industry, a very special broadcast that we're doing in collaboration with Melbourne Knowledge Week. My name is Flick Ford and I'm joined by my co-host, Paul Anthony Nelson, for Primal Screen's first ever live in conversation here in Triple R Studios. You can, if you're not already, you can listen in via 102.7 FM, or you can watch us at rrr.org.au or on Triple R's YouTube or on our Facebook page or via the Melbourne Knowledge Week Digital Hub. So today, today also marks our 10 years of film criticism. So we've been very on Monday night. So we've also had a lot of other little celebrations today and the final days of April Amnesty. So please make sure you do subscribe to be in the running for lots of cool prizes. Earlier tonight, we spoke with Screen Australia's Anthony Grundy. And just prior to that sponsorship announcement, we were joined by the director of film at ACMI, Kristy Matheson. So tonight's show has been something of a pulse check on our local film industry in the aftermath of lockdowns and cinema closures. And to explore that further, and I'd like to welcome our third and final guest for tonight, film reviewer for the ABC and general manager, a film programmer and general manager at the ASTA, and my parents' favourite authority on film, Zak Hepburn. Welcome, Zak.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here with you.
We're very disappointed Kubrick hasn't joined us as well, Zak.
If you're not aware,
he's currently sleeping in the other room. We figured it was best for the auditory experience not to have the motorboat snoring going on. So, we can have that for some audience participation later if you'd like. But for now, you just got me.
All right. Well, that'll do.
It's past his bedtime. It's got to be up early for those reviews on ABC.
So last time we spoke on Primal Screen, Zak, it was at the start, I think, or maybe the end of the first lockdown. It's all time has become a circle, a flat circle right now. But we did speak with you and Christian about, how cinemas are coping, like our local cinemas are coping. And at that time, it was a lot of speculation. How has the last year been for you?
Look, it's certainly been a rollercoaster ride. I think that's an understatement. I think that's the understatement of the year for everybody. But what I have found, and I think this has been what most of the people in the industry, particularly in Melbourne, have found, is that people want to go to the movies. People want that shared experience. You just have to have the film to pull them off the couch. And a lot of films, unfortunately, have been moved around. We know release dates have been, arbitrarily moved around the entire calendar. For us at the ASTA, given that we don't really rely on new release content, it's actually been a really interesting experience seeing what retrospective titles draw people. And, we've had some really great experiences. Star Wars is still drawing people into the cinema, more than 40 years later. Whereas a lot of films like, we just played Nomadland in a double feature with 3 billboards, and that had somewhat of a disappointing turnout. So it's been a fantastic sort of almost like an audience kind of post-mortem in a way to see what is drawing crowds, what is igniting people. I think in our arena, particularly the use of celluloid, 35 millimeter and 70 millimeter prints, which obviously the ASTA is renowned for using a lot. That's really been a huge draw card to get people back into the cinema, which makes sense because that is a cinema experience that you can't match at home. I don't care how fantastic your 4K television is, and I've got a decent 4K television. It is no match for a 70 millimeter print. And I think that's something that is set in stone, and that's something that will always be set in stone. And that's why cinema, I think, is always going to be a vital sort of exhibition method.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a nice projector set up, but my cat meows every time John Travolta comes on the screen. So I have to go to the cinema to avoid him.
Yeah, unless you're Quentin Tarantino, you're going to the cinema.
True.
Exactly. I mean, look, it's been a fascinating experience re-engaging with customers too. I mean, obviously when we spoke first, no one knew what the environment was going to be like. And I think one of the things that's been so fantastic is seeing how great audiences have been with the changing dynamics, masks, no masks, distancing, no distancing. So it's been a really fantastic experience seeing that audiences want to embrace their environment I mean, this restaurants, this go to spaces as well as cinemas. And that's what I think is going to be the savior of this experience, of these collective experiences, people engaging with the changing dynamics and making sure the landscape that they want to be a part of actually endures. And I think the only way we can all do that is obviously by playing our part. So, but particularly in cinemas, it's a big ask, particularly for a double feature at the Astor. When we reopened in late November, there was 20 people, 1,100 seat theatre, all wearing masks, all distanced out, and now we're back up to no masks and full capacity. So, it's an incredible experience to be able to see how audiences have engaged with those different changing parameters.
Yeah. You made some predictions when you were last on the show about that. Has it actually, have the audiences returned in the way that you were expecting, or has it come back quicker than you thought, or has it taken longer?
It's a good question. I think, it fluctuates, and we're seeing that more so than ever. I mean, the Astor was always a swings around about sort of location. You could have 900 people in one night and 10 people in the other night. And I mean, that's just the nature of repertory programming, because you never really know what's going to kind of hit the zeitgeist at any given time. I feel for us, it's certainly been a bit of a comfort thing. People want to go and have an experience, but they also want to have an experience that they know is going to be worth their time. I think, we're also sort of deprived of experiences at the moment that we really want to make sure what we do is what we want to do. And going to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in 70mm, which we just played recently for the cinema's 85th birthday, I was astounded by the turnout we had for that. We had close to 300 people in the cinema for that. That wasn't even on our usual calendar. It was sort of like an added session because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to do it or not, given all the changing sort of circumstances. So we didn't really plan for a large-scale 85th celebration. We just thought we'll put a film on that we know everyone loves, that's sort of synonymous with the Astor, and hopefully, they will come, as the old Field of Dreams adage goes. But I think that really personified for me the fact that people want to go, people want to have an experience, and seeing something like 2001: A Space Odyssey at the Astor in 70mm. I mean, if that's not a Melbourne film scene experience, I don't know what is. So it's nice that people are embracing it, and we had a lot of first-time visitors too. I think funnily enough, people have actually sought out new areas to see content, new experiences. I think before there was a lot of kind of white noise on. Now people have really sort of honed in on what they want to do and how they want to spend their time out of the house. So no, look, in terms of being a little kind of worried, I think when we spoke before, I think everyone was a little bit sort of cautious about how we were going to proceed. We've been incredibly fortunate. I mean, snap lockdowns aside, I think we're really in a good space, and it's just so heartwarming to see the film-going culture in Melbourne so animated and so alive. I think people are really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually, if anything, it's the whole absence makes the heart grow fonder. I honestly feel as though when it was taken away from us, you just realise how much a part of that weekly, I suppose for both of us, weekly cinema going. And I think it was really missed. And I wonder whether, usually in times of financial difficulty, sometimes there's a tendency to go with what's safe. So there's this idea of potentially the sequels are going to be popular because it's like a known quantity. So when films are being created, they're like, oh, that's a safe bet, or if it's a franchise. And I wondered whether, at the Astor, you screen all these like retro films. I wonder if people coming back, you're having higher numbers at things like 2001 or Star Wars, because it's a known thing. And so people, maybe if they have, lost their job during lockdown, which happened to a lot of us, maybe they're just wanting a more sure thing. So I wonder if you'll see a change in what we're choosing to see and wanting to see on the big screen.
I think that's a great point, because I think we've always been somewhat experimental with our programming. We've always done strange double features or things that sort of challenge the audience member sometimes. We referred to our just summer past calendar as the calendar of comfort, where we had all Indiana Jones, Empire Strikes Back, or all these classic films, 2001, everything that you know and love about the Astor, we put that on a sheet of paper to be able to sort of draw you back in. And I think audiences really do love that sort of comfort, that they like that sort of warm embrace of something that they've experienced before. And I think that's something that will probably continue. Not that we won't be doing anything, more esoteric. We have The Devils coming up in 35mm, which probably hasn't been screened in a cinema in the last, I can't tell you, because it's been on a booking embargo for so long. So we're trying to kind of ease
like a Mexican exploitation double coming up as well.
We have a Mexican wrestler exploitation double coming up, which but let's try it, Paul. Who knows? You never know unless you try.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Zach.
I actually did my honours thesis on Mexican cinema, and a chapter was dedicated to Mexican wrestling. So
get down to the
luchador cinema could be ripe for a comeback post-COVID. Who knows? So
hey, they're all wearing masks.
But yeah, look, I think we're constantly being reactionary to this thing. Everything we do is a learning process. You're essentially relearning your job. I mean, we relearnt it in the way we were dealing with the front of house environment, and that stems through to a programming sort of environment. And I think you just have to listen to what is out there. You've got to kind of put your ear to the floor and go with what the audience want. And if that is comfort cinema now, that's how somewhere like the Astor sort of survives, that we can offer that sort of content. We've also got some live music coming up too. We're trying to pivot in a way. So, having a space that's an environment that's large, that people know, and has these sort of areas that you can tap into is where it's going to flourish. And even in the early days of COVID, I said, the cinema outlasted World War II. And I think, if anything, the Astor is an endurance house. Like it will go through things. And I think that's something that we've seen through this certain period we're in now, is that people want the place to prosper, and they will do it by supporting it. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of it is also identity. We've been all through so much, but I think I honestly, from being in Melbourne during this time, feel a lot closer to Melbourne, and particularly the Melbourne film industry. And one of the ways in which we show our support is by showing up to these screenings, by, buying merch or I think that there is a real, I think the community are wanting to, where possible, to give that kind of support.
I mean, I obviously talking to Kristy just previously, I was at some Wong Kar Wai sessions. I mean, they were fantastically attended. And I think, institutions and branding last with people. And if you have a connection to your audience, if you have a dialogue with your audience, they'll remember that. And I think that's something that the Astor always was so good at, even prior to my sort of tenure there. They had a real connection with their audience. There was a dialogue with their audience. They knew what the audience wanted. It's not just this sort of amorphous cinematic blob sort of churning out content to you. There's a real connection to their audience, and they want to have a dialogue, knowing what the audience wants to see and presenting it in a way that we know the audience want to see it in. So it's a real back and forth, and I think audience members are really receptive to that.
Absolutely. And I think the curating is also an education. I feel like there's, you find you kind of hopefully are sometimes challenged by film programming, and it introduces you to new material. And we definitely try to do that on Primal Screen.
Yeah. And the Astor are doing that as well, coming up with your David Lynch pairings, which is fantastic, coming up on Friday night.
I've been working on that for some time. I mean, we did a Lynch retrospective a couple of years back, where we did the whole chronological filmography. This time around, I thought, well, we want to do it again. We want to do something a little bit different. So the concept of pairing a Lynch film with a film that's either been directly influenced by Lynch or has been a direct influence on Lynch. I thought that was something really unique and something you don't see very often. I mean, and the idea is that, very few venues in Melbourne do double features. So the idea that the double feature can be a conversation between two films, I think that was a really exciting thing for me, and something we haven't done before. So our first session of that is this Friday, kicking off with a Razorhead and some short films of Lynch. My personal favourite double that we have in that kind of Lynch stream is June on 35mm paired with Under. I just, those films shouldn't work together, but so I just really love it.
Under the Skin and Dune. Yeah, it's
I wouldn't have paired
wild.
those, but I'm very excited to check that out. Look, if you get down to the Astor on Friday, that's I suppose the first takeaway. But for listeners and viewers who have just tuned in, this is Primal Screen, an evolving film industry with Paul Anthony Nelson and myself, Flick Ford, and we have just been speaking with film critic, film programmer, and cinema manager at the Astor, Zak Hepburn. Thanks so much for your time, Zak. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks, heaps.
Always lovely to be with you folks. Thanks so much for having me. Cheers.
Our pleasure. So you've been listening to a special live in conversation event here on Triple R in partnership with Melbourne Knowledge Week. This has been Primal Screen, an evolving film industry. A big, big thank you to our guests, Screen Australia's Anthony Grundy, ACMI's Kristy Matheson, and the Astor's Zak Hepburn. Thank you also to our panel operator, Carl Chapman, events producer, Bez Zodair, Dan Dare for filming us tonight, Talks producer Elizabeth McCarthy, and our programming and content manager Beck Hornsby, and to good old Morty Osborne, who will be editing this for our podcast. And I suppose just obviously thank you to Melbourne Knowledge Week for partnering with us for this event. And of course, thank you to all of our listeners and viewers for watching this event via the Triple R website or the Digital Hub. Events like this are really only possible because of our sponsors and our amazing subscribers. If you're not a subscriber yet, April is a wonderful month to do that. There's 5 days left of April Amnesty, and there's stacks of amazing prizes up for grabs. So you should actually check out head straight to rrr.org.au to subscribe or donate. And you can listen back to this conversation at rrr.org.au or watch it on Triple R's website, Facebook and YouTube pages. It is good night from us, but keep listening to Triple R as Local and or General with Jace Moore is up next. Good night.
Good night.